Only the gallows left unscathed. Dan Nolan, Al Jazeera.
As opposition groups in Libya take over areas outside of the capital, state prisons and military buildings are now being searched. And as Tony Bertley reports from the city of Benghazi, fresh allegations of torture and cruelty under Gaddafi's regime are emerging.
As Benghazi embraces freedom and a new future, the dark secrets of a gruesome past are coming to light. Below ground, the burned-out cells of the state security apparatus, where acts of incredible brutality were performed in the name of the Libyan leader.
Torture had no limits, but Gaddafi didn't know about all of the cases. Those in power were afraid of losing their positions, so they would torture people to stay in power.
Torture was the feared method to keep the population under control, and it was inflicted widely. Mohammed Abdullah Ali suffered from this. He was imprisoned a total of 3 times and subjected to brutal beatings which left him with serious deformities and nerve damage. This is how he looked before.
They tied me by my hands, grabbed me by my hair and beat me on the face until I started to bleed, then continued to beat me with the back of their rifles on my face.
They destroyed his body, but not his spirit. Every town had state security, every town had fear. Even though the cells were below ground in the dark, the screams of the victims could still be heard on the nearby streets. The most favoured method of torturing was to hoist a victim into the air upside down and beat the soles of their feet until it was impossible for them to walk. And after a few days of such inhumane cruelty, men and women were prepared to admit just about anything. This device was used to torture several prisoners at once, strung like a washing line across the victims and used until they confessed to whatever they were accused of. 3 of Zakaria Al-Anjani's aunts and 4 of his uncles were tortured by state security. His grandfather was killed by them. He still doesn't know why.
We don't want Gaddafi dead. We want him alive. We want to know where our families are buried, why he killed them and who gave him that right.
That's what many want. Benghazi has suffered before at the hands of Gaddafi's state security. 1,200 civilians were killed in 1996 after a failed rebellion against autocratic rule. Bodies disappeared. Few details were known until now. Khadija Sakhli's 27-year-old son Yusuf was shot and arrested 15 years ago. He was never seen again. Last year, the family was given a certificate stating he was dead, but no explanation.
I haven't seen him since he got shot in our house. They took him to Tripoli. We went to get him, but they said he wasn't there.
The prisons and torture cells of liberated Libya now stand empty, their gruesome secrets of cruelty and inhumanity now open to the world. A sad indictment of a leader who long ago lost the love and respect of his people. Tony Bertley, Al Jazeera, Benghazi.
Ahmed Yusuf is with the Libyan National Initiative in Tripoli. Speaking to Al Jazeera a few minutes ago, he says opposition fighters have barricaded themselves against an attack by forces loyal to Gaddafi in Tripoli.
There are security brigades roaming Tripoli's main streets and controlling Tripoli's main crossings, especially the eastern, western and southern crossings. There are also pro-Gaddafi vehicles roaming the main streets. As for other areas and neighborhoods, the citizens are entrenched, sealing them off with whatever they can, making it difficult for any stranger to enter. We are talking about relative control. Perhaps a regime is trying through the security brigades to send messages to the residents of Tripoli that the regime is in charge. We sense chaos here, and the uprising is confusing the security forces.
Plenty more still to come this news hour, including hundreds of thousands of people flee the violence in Libya. We'll bring you more on the UN warning that Libya is on the verge of a humanitarian crisis. Now, the United Nations General Assembly has agreed to suspend Libya from its Human Rights Council. Let's go to Shihab Ratansi in Washington for more. Shihab.
Imran, the meeting in New York followed Sunday's imposition of sanctions by the Security Council. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, called it a harsh rebuke, as it's the first time any member has been suspended from the Human Rights Council. The 192-member Assembly passed a suspension resolution by consensus without a vote after UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon urged the body to, quote, act decisively, end quote, against Gaddafi.
We meet today on a crisis marked by ongoing violence amid a growing humanitarian emergency and the political situation that could quickly deteriorate further. Meeting in emergency session over the weekend, the Security Council acted with unanimity and decisiveness. I welcome as well the strong statements from many international leaders and organizations, the League of Arab States, the African Union, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, and the European Union.
The question now is what, if any, further action the United Nations is likely to take. AlJazeera's Scott Heidler is at the UN in New York. Do you have an answer to that question, Scott?
No, not just yet. No, there are a couple of things that could be around the corner. We know on the sidelines of the Security Council, they are discussing what could possibly be next. If there's another resolution around the corner, that is still the big question. We do know that the idea of a no-fly zone is not as attractive as it once was over the last couple of days, but the British mission to the United Nations today saying that all options are still on the table. So they're not completely writing that off, but we know that even if they do decide to do that, which is becoming less and less popular, that it's going to be a fight. You've got a situation where the Russians have come out flatly, the foreign minister saying that that is not something that they would entertain, and they have a veto vote in the Security Council. So that is the potential round the corner, would be something more in the Security Council. But right now, again, it's not looking like it's going to be a no-fly zone, nor is it going to be any military action, which again has become more unpopular as the last couple of days since that resolution over the weekend in the Security Council. Shihab.
It's the consensus, though, on throwing Libya out of the UN Human Rights Council. Some caution expressed about the US's motives in all of this.
Definitely. There were 3 nations that disputed this vote today in the General Assembly. It actually wasn't a vote. It was a consensus that was passed, this resolution kicking Libya off the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. There are 3 voices, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Now, Venezuela, as you alluded to, Shihab, had some specific things to say about the United States and the situation in Libya, and this is what the ambassador had to say.
We urge peace-loving countries in all regions of the world to put a stop to the invasion plans against Libya, which unabashedly were announced by the Department of State of the United States and the Pentagon. The purpose of these plans is clear: to appropriate the vast potential of natural and energy resources, strategic resources that are stored in the motherland of the Libyan people.
Now, in response to that, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, earlier in the week, she called Gaddafi delusional. And after this statement by the Venezuelan ambassador, she said, quote, "There's more than one delusional person speaking this week." Shihab.
Scott Heidler at the UN. Well, in Washington, senior U.S. government and military officials faced questions about the U.S. government's next move in Libya. The U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton warned that Libya's fate hangs in the balance.